And I'm Dave Sussman. Welcome back to America's Voice News. It is a pleasure to be here with you again. I'm delighted to be with Victor Davis Hanson at his home. Thank you, sir. Greatly appreciate you having us. Last time we just talked about this briefly. Last time we had you on, we were sitting at Malibu, California, and it is a delight to see you here in the true red state of California.
Yeah, it is. It's in the interior. We're in the exact geographical center of the state.
So last time we met, it was in the Tony Hills of Malibu, and we were overlooking the Pacific Ocean. It was a fantastic interview. And here we are at your farm near Fresno, obviously red state California. This is a huge dichotomy between what most people think of as California and where you live.
Well, this house was built in 1871 by my great-great-grandmother, and I'm the fifth generation to live in it. These were almonds that my family's had since, the land is, we've had it since the same time, but everything has changed. This is now part of a corporate latifundia paradigm because of globalization. The person who's a wonderful person that rents this has 10,000 acres of almonds. He rents it from me, whereas before there were about 40 families, farm families. They're all gone. They moved away. Prices were low. We're at ground zero of illegal immigration. So there's just so many sweeping changes. Manufacturing dried up. There's a renaissance now with Trump administration, with jobs and manufacturing returning, but this is not the California when I grew up with. There was two Armenian families, Mexican-American family, Punjabi family, Dutch family, two more Armenian families, and they all had 40 to 80 acres.
Yeah.
And their kids, we all played together, we went to schools, and now nobody lives here. It's just wide open farmland, very effectively and efficiently farmed, but it's not agrarian, it's just agribusiness, so it's different. And I'm about the last person that still lives on the farm they own here.
You talk about the multicultural aspect of this land, and I saw some Sikhs driving in. There was obviously, you have Mexican Americans. There was a Chinese contingent here as well.
Yeah.
Right?
One thing about the valley, it was always a natural diversity. Nobody was artificially pegged in a particular tribal rubric. Everybody just got along, and it was more class. They were all farmers, and they were in it together, and they didn't really care how one person looked or didn't work. This is Japanese Americans, Armenian Americans, Punjabi Americans, Mexican Americans, and so I always enjoyed it here, and I still live here because there's a practicality or pragmatism.
Yeah,
I go up to Stanford and everything's in the abstract, but when you get out here, whatever you think about illegal immigration or farming or diversity, you see it in the raw, and it kind of grounds any theories you have as to their viability.
The difference is that the power here in the state of California comes mostly from the coast, Silicon Valley, where you work, Los Angeles, Hollywood, and this is where people they get dirt under their nails. This is where people actually do things.
Yeah, so if we look over there, we can't see, but over 30 miles there's Sierra. That's where our timber, to the extent that it's still functioning in California, the wood we see on framed houses in the coast, the watershed from the Sierra Nevada, the water that goes to the coast, both through Hetch Hetchy, the California Water Project, the food around here, almonds that you see in Whole Foods, grapes, tomatoes. There's a lot of mining here. All of that is taken into the coast, and that's and as well as the oil. Right down here in Bakersfield, there's a huge oil field. Okay. Fracking. So from La Jolla to Berkeley, whether people get up in the morning and they need gas, they need food, they need energy, they need their wood deck, their wood floor, their granite counter, it all comes from somewhere else, and a lot of it comes from the interior of California, and they don't quite understand that. You can't live, in other words, with an app, or you can't drive a social media page, or your iPhone won't really feed you. So I think we forget that muscular labor and hard physical work is not, it's not passé. Without it, these people wouldn't live on the coast one day.
You're a senior fellow at the Hoover Institute at Stanford University. You're a professor at Cal State University, Fresno, an author of many, many a book, and a guest back on our show. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Greatly appreciate it. So first of all, your latest book, The Case for Trump. Amazing book. I know you've been taking a lot of incoming from this book.
Yes.
They're in fact not just from the left, but many of the folks that have been focusing their ire to you are actually on the right.
They are.
There's a new group out there, a new publication from the remnants of the Weekly Standard called The Bulwark, and you've been kind of going back and forth. It's been interesting to see from a transparent standpoint the words that have been going back and forth here. You know, when we talk about the intellectual quote-unquote right, okay, the way that you see it, what was their biggest problem with converting to a President Trump who was actually doing conservative things they didn't think he was doing?
I think part of it was they were invested in the narrative that a person of that background, with first serious candidate without political or military experience, would not get the nomination. And if they just pressed a little bit more, they could ensure that. He got the nomination. And that sent them into a conundrum. And then they wanted alternative candidates, and they couldn't find any. Then they said, well, we're either not going to vote for him or we're going to vote for Hillary Clinton, and therefore we'll destroy the Trump movement. The Republican Party will be blown up, and like a phoenix rising from the ashes, sober and judicious people like the Bulwark people and others will come in and rebuild the party. But that didn't happen. So then they thought, as a third fallback position, he'll either be a liberal or he'll fail. That didn't happen. So it was like an egg, to take the metaphor of an egg, and they were tapping on this thin shell and they were not seeing any real fissures. But they thought, I must be doing something, and at some magical moment, the whole thing's going to implode. Trump is going to fail or be indicted, the Mueller investigation, the 25th Amendment, the Emoluments Clause, sue for the voting machines, the electors won't follow their constitutional duties and won't vote him in, et cetera, et cetera. And it didn't happen. And rather than stop and look at things empirical and say, wow, I was always for getting out of the Iran deal. I didn't trust the Paris Climate Accord, or I'm for deregulation, or I like a lot of energy production, or it's a scandal what's going on in campus, and he's doing a lot of good things. And they have, instead they almost said, I renounce my previous positions because his fingerprints are on them. And so now they're in a quandary because they have a sneaking suspicion that when this is all over, whether it's in 2020 or more likely in 2024, they're going to be orphaned, because I don't think they're going to waltz right back into a Republican Party and say, we have the magical formula to win those swing states in the Midwest and to appeal to working class Americans. And I think they also understand the left is pretty ruthless. And once they're no longer useful, they're going to cut off the multi-million-dollar funding for all of these anti-Trump websites, or they'll stop inviting them on progressive television, because they perform a function for the left, and they think they're manipulating the left thinks they're manipulating them. And I think the left's more likely has greater resources than correct.
I think the term useful idiots came up in this interchange. And Roger Kimball, a friend of yours and ours, he's been on our show a couple of times, very smart man. He refers to, you know, the Charlie Sykes and the Bill Kristols as bitter souls who are embarrassing themselves now. Have we gotten to that point where these former icons of the conservative movement are there?
We'll put it this way. I spent a lot of time during the Bush administration furious that to support the Iraq War, which was voted on by both houses of Congress, made one a Nazi. And although I wasn't a member of the project of New American Century that Bill Kristol was, and I didn't talk about American greatness as he did, national greatness, excuse me, I was furious when they called Kristol and Michael Hayden Nazis, and they were using Gestapo-like tactics in Guantanamo, and et cetera, et cetera. Now it's very ironic that these people that you once defended are calling you Nazis. I don't mind if they disagree with the book or something, but for Gabriel Schoenfeld to say that I play the role of Martin Heidegger, the Nazi apologist, to Trump-Hitler, and then to say, of course, I'm not raising the Hitler metaphor.
No, or Stalin,
yes,
or Mao.
Yeah, and that was a very common rhetorical trick in classical oratory, where you would say, I won't mention about my opponent's mother as a prostitute, or as for the fact that, I would never bring that comparison. Then you do it, and that's what they do. And so I'm kind of shocked at that they're so desperate they would resort to imagery that used to be used against them.
So from their perspective, they see a president that they believe doesn't have a mooring of ethics or even languaging. I mean, and there's a lot of people, I would categorize myself as one, that sometimes wishes that the president would pull back a little bit from the tweets. I had to turn off the notifications last weekend on my Twitter. But you compare the use of Donald Trump's words, President Trump's words, in your book, The Case for Trump, to some iconic 50s movies. You talked about High Noon, Shane, Magnificent Seven, and talk about that, because I think that was a really great analogy or metaphor.
Well, I start with Sophocles' Ajax, and he's a Trojan hero, at least in Sophocles' later treatment of him, who didn't get what he deserved. He should have got the reward of Achilles' armor after Achilles died, but he was outsmarted by the deep state. So he had this long play where he says, Menelaus was unfair to me. Agamemnon, I was the greatest warrior, and he pouts, he's angry, and he doesn't quite get it, that he's uncouth, he's big, he's clumsy, he's compared to an ox by Homer. And then in Sophocles' version, you're never going to get it. And it's sort of like when Shane comes in and he tries to go straight, he tries to play by the rules in the great Western of George Stevens. And the sodbusters have no ability to solve their problems with these cattle barons. And all of a sudden, he understands that somebody's got to kill Jack Palance. And it's going to be him, but if he does it, he's going to exhibit a skill set that offends people. So when they start talking about Jack Palance, Jack Wilson in the movie, one of the sodbusters who's going to be a direct beneficiary says, how do you know about all these gunslingers? I have no truck with gunslinging. And that's sort of what Trump is, that once he gets successful, and he's becoming very successful, people are starting to say, well, the economy's good, things are getting better overseas, gas is pretty moderate priced, I just can't, he doesn't tweet for me. And of course we would like him not to tweet, but that's like asking Shane to, you know, use a bow and arrow rather than a gun. He is what he is. He's a Curtis LeMay, he's a George Patton.
Or a Rodney Dangerfield.
I mentioned that in the book, that, that he's a Rodney Dangerfield that tries to go into the country club, and Judge Smalls just can't tolerate him, but he's empathetic in a weird way. And I think that was his appeal. People said, you know, the guy has orange hair and a long tie and a suit and a Queen's accent, whether he's in Sacramento, California, or whether he's in you know, Montgomery, Alabama. And Hillary is you-all and twang and bowling, or she's New England prim and proper, or John Kerry is wearing camouflage and a duck outfit, hunting outfit. But people said, the guy is authentic. He doesn't change just because of his audience. Says anything, anywhere, anytime to anybody.
I think that's what makes you so endearing as well, because the way that you write, and I've read so many books now, and you know, you're a classicist, but at the same time, I can read you. I'm not an intellectual, quote unquote, okay? I've been educated, but I can understand everything that you're saying. And I think that's the gift that Donald Trump has as well. It's the everyman. So after the break, and in fact, I want to get into some of the breaking news as well that we are just talking about before the interview started. So we're going to be right back with Victor Davis Hanson at home. I'm Dave Sussman at America's Voice News. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Dave Sussman here at America's Voice News, and we are at home with Victor Davis Hanson, whose latest book, The Case for Trump. Now, this book not only goes into some of the cultural and social issues that we were just talking about, but it's also going into some of the political enemies from the standpoint of when we talk about how the Democrats have created this investigation out of thin cloth. First of all, my question to you is the news over the past week there's been a lot of controversy about Senator John McCain, the late Senator John McCain. And I've stood up and I've said this, and I think you have, as others have as well. You can honor the man's service, what he went through in Vietnam and what he did for his country, but you can still have major disagreements with him, especially in the past couple of years politically, the thumbs down for Obamacare. But what happened here with the dossier, the Steele dossier, and him taking it and shopping it to the FBI?
I was really disappointed because I had criticized Trump when he disparaged his captivity, but that was an old feud, and Trump is politically unwise to continue that tweeting war against somebody who's deceased. You know, in Latin there's a great phrase, nihil dicere nisi bonum de mortuis, don't say anything bad about the dead. We're all going to be there, that's the implication. But that doesn't obscure the fact that John McCain had called Trump, preempted that whole fight by calling his supporters crazies. And then he ran on, as you said, he ran in the primaries about he was going to be the fighter to repeal Obamacare. So he really betrayed the confidence of his own primary voters out of a personal spite to be the one vote that would deny Donald Trump that victory. But it wasn't about Donald Trump, it was about us that have to suffer under Obamacare. And then we found that he, at a time after the election, before the president had even got a chance to show what he could do or could not do, here you have a senator with an unverified dossier using his contacts in the State Department to seed it along with the left and get it out and to destroy him personally with unverified innuendo. And so I looked at the Paul Wellstone funeral that was so controversial, and I looked at the McCain funeral. They weren't that different. That very solemn occasion was used by members of the McCain family and by Barack Obama and even George W. Bush to a degree to contrast a noble McCain with use it for political purposes to attack a sitting president. So I can see why there was that feud, and what he did was seeding the dossier was part of a long it was a long odyssey that dossier had, and there was a lot of illegality and unethical behavior that got us to the point where the Mueller investigation started up. Remember two things about it. Take away the dossier, which is unverified and fraudulent. There is no evidence whatsoever. And today's the day where the Mueller investigation will announce its findings, and I can guarantee you there's not going to be collusion in there. And then the other thing is, remember, had Hillary won, we wouldn't know anything about collusion. Donald Trump would have gone off in the sunset. They would have rumored that he colluded, but nobody would have taken the time. They wouldn't have cared to go find out if he committed a criminal act or not. Why the Mueller investigation arose was furor over Hillary Clinton losing, Donald Trump winning, and having this smear document seeded by people like John Brennan, John McCain, Bruce Orr, Andrew McCabe, people in the DOJ, and then leaked before the election to David Corn at Mother Jones and Michael Iskoff at Yahoo. So I remember reading in the fall, I think it was in September, all of these crazy stories that somebody named Carter Page was going over to Moscow and telling the Russians, hey, thank you for hacking and helping Trump, and we're going to drop sanctions. And then all of a sudden we hear that Michael Iskoff says later on, I don't believe it. Well, thanks. That's 2 years too late for the damage you did.
Everybody knew that it was, I mean, Van Jones 2 years ago, it's a nothing burger.
Yeah, he did.
So
he said that. Peter Strzok said that. There's no there there.
There's no there there. So my question comes back to somebody like a McCain, or you mentioned George W. Bush. Go back to 2008, or, you know, the lead up to the campaign. They called McCain a racist. George W. Bush. So they took the incoming and much worse Nazi and the same epithets.
They implied, they ran commercials where he looked befuddled and had Alzheimer's. Couldn't remember how many houses he had, supposedly. They took did the same thing to Mitt Romney. So I got really upset about that because in 2006 to 8, they said that George Bush was a Nazi, a brown shirt. They made a movie, The Death of a President, about imagining his assassination, Alfred Knopf. published a novel about killing Bush. So this idea that Trump caused all this venom is ridiculous. And for George Bush and the Bushites to say, wow, Trump kind of deserves what he gets, and you're thinking, wow, we were out on a limb trying to defend you from the same type of leftist vituperation, and you turn around, in the case of Michael Hayden, who photoshops a picture of Auschwitz to suggest that Trump is, I guess, a genocidal monster in his policies at the border. And I thought, didn't I write an article, didn't we write articles, we in the conservative movement, saying that you were not a Gestapo-like inquisitor at Guantanamo? But that's one of the most disappointing things that I write about in the book.
Right.
The Never Trump movement, we don't know whether they were always progressive or they were in it for the career, but there's no consistency, there's no empiricism, there's no self-awareness or modesty about what they're doing, because they're using the same tactics against Trump that was used by the left against them, and so that's shameful.
I think one of the biggest frustrations for many conservatives who grew up, like myself, watching Bill Kristol, and I met with Bill Kristol right after the election. We were on the Weekly Standard Cruise, and I asked him point blank, I said, okay, now President-elect Trump at the time has won. Will you support him? Obviously, he was pushing McMullen, right, out of Utah. Yes. Okay, as a third party.
Evan McMullen. Yeah.
Evan McMullen. So he says, well, if he wants to push forward conservative judges and he wants to repeal some of these regulations and he wants to take a look at tax reform, I will support him. So is it ego? Is it that just there's no, they don't have a fight? I don't know quite what to make of this.
I think, as I said earlier, there was a sense that at each juncture in the Trump odyssey, the nomination, the general election, the actual administration, they had been wrong, and rather than correct or recalibrate, they thought they doubled down in the venom, that they would help push Trump to his logical trajectory, which was failure. They would come in. That's all. I get all that, and I mentioned it. But there was also, I think, a couple of other things. Is they had a certain New York to Washington view of what a Republican president is, financially, where he got his money, who his parents were, where he went to school, how he conducted himself, and Trump didn't fit that. He got in a wrestling ring with a guy. I mean, he was in casinos. He dyes his hair. He's been married 3 times. Yeah. And then they had a vision as well that you don't talk like he does. You don't behave like he does. My problem with that thesis is, for that to be persuasive, that Trump, the messenger, counsels out the message which they embrace. They had to tell me that Trump is so far beyond the pale, so far beyond presidential behavior, that the man Trump nullifies all of their previous commitments to the issues that they mostly shared with Trump. So I asked myself, well, how do we adjudicate that? Well, let's look at Bill Clinton. Trump's been in office 2.5 years, or going to be. Did he have sex with an intern? Did he frisk a girl in a hallway? No, he didn't. I look at LBJ, very successful president. Does Trump pick up animals by the ears? Does he pull out his genitals and expose them to his staff? Does he sit on the toilet and defecate while he's wanting to discuss policy? No, he doesn't. Does he have affairs? No, not in the White House.
Right.
How about JFK? Does he deflower virgins in the presidential bed? Does he have orgies in the pool with his aide? No, he doesn't. And so I'm thinking, well, maybe I should try Harry Truman. Does he write letters to music critics threatening to emasculate their genitals? No, he doesn't. Is Ivanka Trump scurrying around the halls of the West Wing, setting up tryst so Trump can have an affair where Melania won't know about it, in the way that Anna Roosevelt did that with Lucy Mercer, so Eleanor wouldn't know? No, he's not doing that. And is he, to take a military image, is he sleeping with his stepniece like George Patton did? No. So what I'm getting at is, I'm not condoning bad behavior in Trump, but I'm saying that we don't know much about our own history, and within the parameters of presidential behavior while they're in office,
Right.
I don't think that he's beyond the pale. And second, we've got to define morality in a little broader sense. The two most sterling presidents in my lifetime have been Jimmy Carter and Jerry Ford. They didn't lie, they didn't cheat, they didn't steal, they were faithful. I had enormous admirations for the way they conduct themselves. That being said, the period from 74 to 1980 was one of economic stagnation, stagflation, terrible economy, horrific foreign policy, Soviet Union on the march, the Iran hostage. It was just a joke, a cruel joke. But what I'm getting at is, I don't think that, I wish it were true, but sterling character does not translate into great leadership all the time. And I thought the people in the Never Trump right might say, you know, we play with the cards that are dealt with us. I wish Trump were like Jerry Ford and Carter, but he's not. Mm-hmm. But his plan and his leadership and his accomplishments are much superior. But they couldn't make that adjustment.
I want to get more into the economy with you after this next break.
Thank you.
We're at home with Victor Davis Hanson. Dave Sussman here at America's Voice News. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Dave Sussman here for America's Voice News, and we are with Victor Davis Hanson. And Victor Davis Hanson's latest book, The Case for Trump, an amazing read, fascinating, and there's just so much going on in the world as we're speaking right now, outside of not just the White House and the United States, but for example, you talk about China.
Yeah.
And President Trump has come in, and I think for the first time, at least in my lifetime, watching many different presidents, this president is taking a different approach to China,
yeah.
Unlike anything I've seen. It seems to have been some, tell me if I'm wrong here, some appeasement somewhat. You got Tiananmen Square, we're going to slap their wrist in the media about it, but otherwise they kind of always backed off. What is this president doing differently than previous Republican presidents have done?
He's doing what he campaigned on. Everybody agreed that China violated copyrights, patents, they appropriated technology as a cost of doing business. They ran a $600 billion surplus, and they weren't going to stop. They appropriated the Spratly Islands, made a military base, bullied our allies, the Japanese, the South Koreans, the Taiwanese, the Filipinos, the Australians. Okay, so everybody knew that. The establishment view is the more concessions you give to them, the wealthier they get. They're going to be on a fated pathway to Carmel or to Greenwich Village or the Upper West Side. They will be so affluent, they're going to come over here, they're going to say, wow, I love America, I love Stanford, I love UCLA, this is great, I want to be just like you guys. And Tiananmen Square, where they kill 10,000 people in and after Tiananmen, is a speed bump, that's all. Mm-hmm. Trump comes along and says, no, he says two things. They're not going to change. They're basically, Trump didn't say it, but he basically was saying they're like the Japanese in the 1930s with the Greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere. They take Western technology and Western know-how and they save on R&D development, and then they become fascistic. And they have a type of capitalism that's compatible with authoritarian communism. Well, everybody said, that's kind of disturbing. The next thing he said, the corollary was, but we can stop it. And they thought, wow, you can't stop it. They have 1 billion people. They have, Tom Friedman just got back and said they have bullet trains, they have shiny airports. And Trump says, no, they can stop it. One American worker produces 3 times the goods and services of 3 Chinese workers. In other words, they have 1 billion people, we have 330 million people. We produce about 22 trillion in GDP, they produce about 8. And Trump said, we have 11 carrier groups, they got 1. All the technology, and whether it's military or Facebook or Google, it's here. So he gave everybody a sense of confidence that he could stand up to China, and that they were neo-colonialists in Africa and Asia. They were imperialists, they were racist, they were intolerant of religion, especially Islam. And when he ripped off that scab, that festering wound was like, almost everybody now says, wow, it's rotten under there. And so I experience this very bizarre, surreal visits to my job at Stanford when I hear colleagues or Stanford professors say, we've got to press China on human rights now, to the point of cutting off trade if we have to. We have to protect the Uyghurs. We have to help people in Africa that are defaulting on these extortionist loans at the China. And I thought, well, is anybody going to mention the name Trump? Mm-hmm. He was like that Apple commercial in 2004 where the athlete woman runs in and throws that hammer into 84. The screen.
Yeah.
1984. Yeah. Yeah. And then all of a sudden Big Brother stops talking. Yeah. That's what he did with China. He was crude and crass, getting back to the gunslinger image. And as soon as he did that, there wasn't much there left of the facade. Everybody said, wow, they're pretty bad. They conduct espionage at university campuses. They try to censor people that want to talk about Chinese freedom. But they never mentioned Trump. But that's what he did with China.
Well, you take a look at decades of history between America and China, and you say that for up until now, Donald Trump, and you talk about it in your book, we never really had a president that actually called it what it was. You now have Chinese scholars in the United States that are now talking about this. Gordon Chang, I believe it is. He's working with Pompeo.
Well, I mean, before we had the so-called reverse China lobby. That would be the intellectual nexus of Princeton, Harvard, Yale, and they were telling us more concessions. China will appreciate that. They will look at our magnanimity as kindness to be reciprocated in kind. And then we had another block of loners, lone wolves, Miles Yu, Gordon Chang, and they were saying, no, that will be considered weakness to be manipulated and exploited. And now the unforeseen happened is that Miles Yu is in the Policy and Planning Bureau of the State Department, an advisor to Mike Pompeo, and Gordon Chang is on TV giving us some pretty sober advice. There's others as well, that Mr. Pillsbury is back in another incarnation, that China is a danger. So all of a sudden the intellectual temperament has changed, and those who were the outsiders are the insiders, not because of just politics, but because they had the more convincing argument all along.
If you listen to the media, and much of the media, we know what they are as far as politically aligned, but you will hear the phrase over and over again that Donald Trump in America is no longer respected because of Donald Trump around the world. But take a look at what is happening, and I ask you I mean, just this week we just heard Donald Trump, he talked about the Golan Heights in Israel. Okay, and the fight that we're now seeing, and I want to get into this after the next break on Israel with the United States, but what is the view of the United States and Donald Trump outside of our media bubble?
Well, I've talked to a lot of journalists. I've traveled abroad a lot. I think in the last 2 years I've visited 2 or 3 or 4 European countries. The Hoover Institution is a transit area for diplomats. And there's 2 reactions to Trump. There's a superficial veneer, and it's sort of a furrowed brow and sober and judicious, and we're kind of worried about transatlantic relationships. And then you talk off the record, and a European will tell you, we were never going to pay 2% all of NATO. It just wasn't going to happen. Why should we? Or somebody from Japan would say, we were waiting for you to China. We were going to have to make accommodations with China. We were waiting for you to do something. We didn't even know you were in your nuclear umbrella anymore. And that's the attitude. So I don't know what we call it, but I do know that I've talked to U.S. military officers who tell me that in 2014-15, there were dozens, if not hundreds, of incidents in the Straits of Hormuz where Iranian planes, missiles, and boats were hazing our forces. And they tell me that in 2018 there's none. And I think that's because the Iranians have more respect for Trump than they did Obama. They liked Obama a lot more. But they think Trump might be crazy. They think he's unpredictable. They think he's 101% American nationalist. They thought Obama was a citizen of the world. So, you know, is it better to be liked by foreign leaders or to be respected and even feared, or to be considered unpredictable? So I think that people in Poland, if they get in a jam, or people in Israel get in a jam, or people in Japan get in a jam, they think Donald Trump will be there. Publicly, they like the charisma and the diplomatic speak of Barack Obama. There's no doubt about that.
We see the media in the United States obviously very favorable to most left-wing politicians. We see that also worldwide. And I think outside of America, most people don't realize this. Journalism is a leftist institution now in Europe and
it is.
All around the world, isn't it?
All you have to do is look at the schools of journalism.
Yeah.
Journalism is a product, at least elite journalism, of journalism schools, which are a product of the academic institution. And the academic institution in America is left-wing and progressive and unapologetic about it. And then also, journalists feel that they always have the in. They're in the know. They have greater education. They developed a contempt for hoi polloi. I remember, I think his name was Caputo for CNN. He said, "I'm at a Trump rally." Remember, he said, and that guy over there has more teeth than the entire. So does the deep state bureaucracy. Whether you're Peter Strzok talking about hillbillies and those people who smell up Walmart.
It's contempt.
It's contempt for people they don't know anything about, have no appreciation for, and blame. It's also very weird. People, as we saw with the college admittance scandal, people who have a lot of white privilege feel that they can use that white privilege for their own particular children or special interests, and they get away with it with a kind of a medieval penance by saying that some guy over in Merced has white privilege, and a welder has white privilege, white privilege, white privilege, white privilege, white supremacy, but not us at Stanford, not us at Harvard, not us at Silicon Valley that are making $500,000 a year. Our kids are very privileged. It's that guy in Tulare, it's that guy in Youngstown. We hate him. He has a snowmobile. He's polluting the earth with his, with his jet skis, and he's a Winnebago nut. But I think Trump, again, kind of blew up that whole construct. I don't think they get away with as much as they did before.
I think of it as kind of this liberal carbon offset for racism.
Yeah,
or white privilege. It's the equivalent of carbon offset.
No, it is.
We're going to finish up with our last segment here, coming up with Victor Davis Hanson here in beautiful Central Valley of California, the red part of California. There actually is one, and we'll continue right after the break.
Well, I think if you live out here and you work out here, and it's not just a boutique activity, but you actually have to make a living, I can tell you, you get a lot of empathy for people who use physical labor. I know when I farmed here, it was almost every single day you had to pay insurance, you had to pay for sulfur, pesticides, water, labor, and there was very little coming in. One day the broker would call you and say, plums are, don't worry, they're $12. Oh, by the way, we're only going to pay you $2. Or one day you'd have a beautifully thin plum orchard and it would hail two days before harvest. And then you can't say, appeal to a dean and say this isn't fair, or go to a local appeals board at a city, a city job and say this isn't fair, I want better compensation. So it creates with truck drivers, farmers, loggers, it creates an independence and autonomy, self-reliance. And we need a lot of those people still to advise us. And that was sort of the subtext of the Trump victory, that we're still people, especially in the Midwest, but in the interior of the entire country, that just hadn't bought on to the Obama-Clinton project. They just didn't think that the future was going to be all of us living on these coastal corridors, hipsters, getting married at 40, maybe one kid, no kids, living in apartments, coding. They didn't want to do that. They didn't think that was going to get us by, and they were right. What's making the United States work right now is cheap energy from frackers, exports of natural gas and oil, construction, manufacturing's back. And it's not just high tech and finance. That's an integral part of it, but not all.
And now you got Elizabeth Warren and her minions that want to take away that vote from these people. They want to repeal the Electoral College.
Yeah, I think they have an agenda. They, meaning the progressive that are running in 2020, and it's whether it's reparations or whether it's almost legal infanticide or the wealth tax or the 90% tax on high incomes, the open border, the new Green Deal.
Yeah.
I could go on. Abolition of ICE, abolition of student debts, abolition of the Electoral College. You get the impression that that's not a 51% menu. And so they don't think anymore that they can win with the existing way people vote and with the existing voters. And they can either win two ways. They feel we either have to destroy the opposition, so in a scandal, like take Trump out, where there's no alternative, or we've got to change how we vote, get rid of the Electoral College, so we just have popular plebiscites in the big cities, or we have to change the voters. We can do that by bringing 16-year-olds in, as discussed in California. Let felons in Florida vote, divide California up so you get more senators maybe, or let illegal aliens be amnestied and get them into the voting ranks very quickly, or have licenses for illegal aliens and then sort of then wink and nod forget that they're in a separate category when you mail out same-day registration and voting. And we've seen all of that in California. But again, it's a reflection that the Progressive Project does not have a menu that people, 51% of the population, embraces, and they know that. So they want to change the system, and it ranges from getting rid of the Electoral College to packing the Supreme Court.
And extending or reducing the term limit, I should say, of the Supreme Court. Going back to the case for Trump, and we are, and I've been saying this for the last couple of weeks on the show, I believe we're at the valley right now of the election cycle, beginning or spring of 2019. It really doesn't get going for most people outside of our sort of an echo chamber, I guess, regarding the election. We have a Democratic Party now in this country that is pushing so far extreme to the left that you have people like Biden who are now considered moderate. Okay, so and I said this last week and I predicted it. I just want to pat myself on the back. I said that he's probably going to pick Stacey Abrams, or Beto's going to pick Stacey Abrams, or or Bernie, because they need that. They need the color, they need the gender, because this is where they think first. Just a lay of the land right now. What is going on? Ilhan Omar, AOC, what is becoming of the left in the United States?
Well, I think they decided under the Obama administration that they had a new demography, that the white majority was played out or should be played out. They forgot that it was still 70%. So they really pushed this identity politics, number one. And then they felt that the Life of Julia Pajama Boy was the new hipster profile. They were the young guys that were running the campaigns. They were guys on the talking heads. These were the guys that were the future of the country. They get married at 40 if they do. They have 1 or 2 kids at the most, or none. They live in apartments in cities. That was what everybody thought was our profile. And so they went with it. And now all of these issues we talked about earlier that don't poll 51%. So they had a lot of issues and they had a lot of ideas and abstractions that they were talking to an echo chamber. And so you could say we don't want a white guy as president. You could say even a white woman we're kind of conflicted about. And we need reparations. And then it's like the French Revolution, the cycle from the monarchist to the republicanism to the Girondists and to the Jacobins and then to the guillotine and Napoleon. Each position is considered passé the next day. And they're on the race to this hard left. Not only are the issues hard left, but we're kind of bringing in people that think they're emboldened. So we have Mr. Hickelpooker, or whatever, Hickelooper today saying, tell us all of his previous sexual partners. Or we've got Beto saying that he ate dirt. Or we've got Ocasio-Cortez taking selfies as she walks. Or we have to look at the dental flossing or the dental hygiene of Beto. Yep. And we got Joe Biden kind of in a re-education camp saying, I'm really progressive. I didn't mean all that. Yeah. And Kamala Harris attacking the Knights of Columbus, and it's as if I don't know how we would phrase it, but it's if it's a revolutionary cycle, and they want to disown any trace of politically incorrect conservatism. It reminds me of Maoism a lot. It really does.
It's almost as if they're apologetic for American exceptionalism. And we see this, you refer to like, Marcus of Queensberry, right? It's this whole idea of just continually bowing down to, I don't know if it's political correctness or just feeling that we can't at all be exceptional. We have to be even across the plane. Now, when we talk about this new branch of progressivism, Ilhan Omar, we see Israel. The Democrats have just pulled out of AIPAC. Mm-hmm. And I mean, there has to be a certain place in American politics where people can stand up and say, we do not accept anti-Semitism. Even Nancy Pelosi wouldn't allow that to happen in the House last week.
Well, again, this election is like flipping over a rock, and what's underneath is pretty ugly, but it was always there, but the rock was on top of it. So Nancy Pelosi and Schumer were kind of the rock.
Yeah.
But if you want to talk about anti-Semitism in the Democratic Progressive Movement, I mean, Barack Obama had a picture with Louis Farrakhan in 2005 that was suppressed. Yeah. Reverend Wright said, this is his personal pastor and advisor, said, I can't talk to Obama anymore. Dim Jews don't let me talk to him. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So anti-Semitism, we could go all day with the quotes of Democratic and progressive people, but the difference was there was always a Bill Clinton, a Hillary Clinton, a Dianne Feinstein, a Schumer, a Steny Hoyer who said, just keep it down. Not now. Yeah. They're saying, you know what, I accuse you guys of being counter-revolutionaries, and we're going to go the full revolutionary self. We're going to reveal it. And what you reveal is that anti-Semitism worldwide and in the United States is primarily no longer a right-wing militia-type idea, but it's a left-wing progressive doctrine that says the state of Israel is racist, people who support it are racist, Jews are wealthy white people that oppress people, and we're not going to back down. And Omar didn't back down. When Ocasio-Cortez was revealed as knowing nothing about the Middle East, even though she was editorializing on it, she didn't back down. Tlaib won't back down. And the Black Caucus, I think it was Representative Hank Johnson, he said that people on the West Bank were like termites. That was a Hitlerian phrase, almost. Oh, excuse me.
Farrakhan said that.
Yeah. And he stole it from Farrakhan.
Okay. Yeah.
And so when Farrakhan was at the Women's March, Linda Saussure would not give up Farrakhan. No, I can't do that. Right. And we got all kind of clips from the discussions of people that were involved that were very anti-Semitic. But they're doing this. Why are they doing it? Because they don't think there's a downside. So they're saying to themselves, we know our constituencies. We know our minority tribal politics. We know our young hipsters. They don't mind being that we're anti-Semitic. They don't like Israel. The Democratic Party does not poll favorably very much anymore to Israel. And nobody can address that. The anti-Semitism that's endemic in the black political class. Nobody wants to talk about that. The Latino political class, nobody wants to talk about it. But Trump did today in a very blunderbuss. He said, they're anti-Israel and they may be anti-Jewish. Well, yeah, but nobody would ever dare say that. But what are they going to say when he says that? Trump is not stupid. He's got an animal cunning. When he said that, what he was really saying is, I just was outrageous, and I want one of you people to stand up and say, no, we're not anti-Israeli, we're not anti-Jewish. And I don't think they will. No, because to do that would lose support.
Yeah, and it would. But their argument is, and I'd like your reaction to this, is that it isn't that we're anti-Jewish, it's that we're anti-Zionist. We don't like Bibi Netanyahu. And we saw what Obama did in 2015, and he planted the State Department, actually spent money in a foreign election. Yeah. So yeah, it's conservative Israelis they don't like. Is that what it is?
No, because look, there's 190 countries, 193 in the world. Yeah. I think there's 35 in the Middle East. So when you talk about human rights, or you talk about expropriated land, or you talk about minority rights, do you talk about what's going on in Somalia? Do you talk about Egypt? Is the human rights going to look at the treatment of homosexuals in Iran or women in Saudi? No. They always go to this one little country. And so half of all the human rights resolution in the UN, this country. All these reports from think tanks, left-wing think tanks about the Middle East, human rights for this place. Always Netanyahu, Bibi Netanyahu. They don't talk about
Hamas or Hezbollah.
No, Hamas, Hezbollah, the theocracy in Iran, what they say. And so the question is, well, if they're not anti-Jewish, why do they focus on one particular state that is a free market, democratic Bill of Rights? Oh, is it because they're Jewish? And that's where that fallacy is exposed, that you can be anti-Israeli, but you're not anti-Jewish, because if you're anti-Israeli, then commiserately you have to be anti-Jordanian and anti-Saudi and anti-Kuwaiti and because their human rights violations are so much more severe to the extent that Israel even has any, and yet they don't. And yet we're supposed to sit here like stupid idiots and say, yes, you're just anti-Israeli, but it has nothing to do with the fact that it's a Jewish state, and nobody buys it.
Another international incident that just took place was obviously the horrific murders in New Zealand. How did it, within literally minutes, fall on the feet of Donald Trump, as far as the blame goes from the international media?
Well, everything is Donald Trump's fault, from tornadoes and global warming to a racial incident. But remember what we do. If there's a mass murder somewhere, it's always a conservative or a gun owner is responsible in the abstract. When James Hodgkinson, who was a Bernie Sanders fanatical supporter and worked on the Sanders campaign, if I'm not mistaken, tried to take out the Republican leadership and maimed Steve Scalise, nobody said this was the direct result of his mother's milk of Sanders socialism. That made him go crazy. So I don't think anybody takes that seriously. And by the way, he was an ecological fanatic as well. So he had a whole menu, as most deranged people do, of positions, and about half of them were contrary to Donald Trump, but they picked the one about supposed white nationalism. And the same thing with the Charlotte, North Carolina statements. If you go back and read exactly what
Charlottesville?
Trump... Yes, Charlottesville. Yeah. If you read exactly what he wrote, not what the media said. Right. It might have been clumsy, but he said this group had Antifa and they had some good people. This group had some white nationalists and there were good people. And the good people he was referring to were the people protesting the toppling of Confederate statues, right, which is a legitimate point to argue over. But that got compressed into that he was praising white nationalists, and he wasn't. He could have been advised better about what the left would do to that statement if it had not been stronger, but he was not what we... And, you know, when I heard it, I was shocked. I thought, wow. And then when I read the tape, it was much different. Same thing with the Covington kids. And then the reverse fashion, same thing with the Jussie Smollett. Same thing with the George Zimmerman. White Hispanic, what does that mean? Photoshopped his face. So we have an electronic lynch mob now that operates. The difference is out west you always had a sheriff with a double barrel that would stop them from storming the jail. Today nobody does. They just go off.
Last question for you, and I greatly appreciate you having us. Thank you so much. Going back to the politics of the day, you see somebody like Elizabeth Warren and who's it, Julian Castro, they're talking about reparations now. Obviously they're going after a power block of voters. They're trying to get back the Obama voters. But is that something that's more deeply concerning to you when we start talking about paying off subsects of people for their votes?
Yeah, it is, and it won't work. And I think the black vote polls that we have of black voters, or just black people in general, it only barely has majority support. There are more white liberals that are for it than there are blacks in total. And I think everybody understands it's unworkable. I mean, you give Barack Obama reparations, who has no history in his family of any American experience. Do you give Kamala Harris, her father said that they owned slaves, her family had owned slaves, her ancestors. Do we have DNA badges, like, do we have to take tests like Elizabeth Warren? 1/4, do we go back to the old Confederacy, 1/16? Who is African American? 1/4, 1/8, 1/16?
10/24.
And then all of a sudden we say, well, Asians were blown up in the railroads as they worked, and Hispanics say, well, we were turned away on the border in 1920, Armenians say in my hometown, I couldn't buy a house in a neighborhood until 1945. And Jews say, well, we were kept out of the Ivy League. And how do we adjudicate all that? And the answer is...
And just Snell's Country Club, by the way.
Yes.
In Caddyshack.
Absolutely. And the answer is the Austria-Hungary Empire, the Balkans, Rwanda, Iraq, tells you don't adjudicate it, you end up fighting and killing each other. We were the only multiracial society since Rome that's worked. And why in our 3rd century with this sterling record of assimilation, intermarriage, integration, we'd all of a sudden want to go tribal again.
It's a slippery slope, isn't it?
It is. Once you start it, and once you start saying, I identify by my superficial appearance and race is essential, not incidental to my persona, then everybody else is going to do it. And you know what's going to happen if... One last thing, Obama was brilliant in one fashion. We had affirmative action for 12% of the population because of slavery and Jim Crow. He basically acculturated us to the idea of people of color, diversity. In other words, you could be a multimillionaire from India that immigrated. Right. You could be an Argentine son of a magnate. You could be 1/4 Egyptian. It didn't matter. All you had to say was you were not white, and you became people of color, and that was 30% of the population. So it went from 30 million people to 200. When you add women in, it was the majority.
Right.
And that was really a brilliant way of running on tribal identity politics, where in the past we said money counts, class counts, not race. Obama said, no, it's people of color. It doesn't matter what your income is, doesn't matter whether your ancestors were exploited. If you're not white, then you're a marginalized people. So you have very lily white Linda Saussure from a middle-class family talking about people of color. She has no color. Elizabeth Warren has no color. Ward Churchill has no color. And most Hispanics that I know are no lighter or darker than Italian Americans. But we're really hung up on this. And
I have to let you go.
Yep.
We don't want to keep Mark Levin waiting for you.
Thank you.
So the case for Trump, Victor Davis Hanson, thank you so much for having us over, and we greatly appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, and we'll be back again very soon at America's Voice News. I'm Dave Sussman. We'll see you soon.